Silence is not passive. It is not weakness. It is a psychological interruption. A narcissistic woman is accustomed to movement, emotional reactions, explanations, defenses, arguments, apologies. These responses are not random. They are the fuel that keeps her internal structure intact. When you suddenly withdraw that fuel, something subtle but profound occurs. The dynamic she once controlled begins to collapse. You see, narcissistic patterns rely on feedback. Whether you admire her or challenge her, you are still engaged, you are still orbiting, but silence removes you from the orbit entirely. It creates a void where validation once lived, and that void is deeply unsettling. It disrupts her sense of certainty. It introduces doubt where there was once dominance. From a Jungian perspective, as taught by Carl Jung, what is not met externally must eventually be faced internally. When you stop reacting, she loses the mirror she used to confirm her power. In that stillness, she is left alone with herself, and that confrontation is far more destabilizing than conflict. Your silence forces reflection without saying a word, and in that reflection, illusions begin to fracture. Remember this: the person who controls their reaction controls the dynamic. When you withdraw your attention, you are not merely stepping back. You are touching a wound she has spent a lifetime trying to conceal. This is what psychology describes as a narcissistic injury. It is not a dramatic collapse on the surface. Often it appears as anger, coldness, mockery, or sudden indifference. But beneath those reactions lies something far more fragile, a threatened self-image. A narcissistic woman builds her identity on the certainty of being desired, chosen, and emotionally dominant. Your silence quietly challenges that certainty. It suggests she is no longer the center of your emotional world. And for someone whose stability depends on external affirmation, that suggestion feels like rejection at the deepest level. As Carl Jung observed, the ego resists anything that threatens its constructed identity. When you stop responding, you expose the gap between the persona she presents and the insecurity she hides. The armor cracks not because you attacked it, but because you refused to reinforce it. Understand this clearly. Her strongest reactions are not signs of power. They are signs of injury, and when you recognize that, you stop fearing her response and start respecting your own restraint. Power in a narcissistic dynamic is rarely loud at first. It is subtle. It lives in who sets the emotional tone, who defines reality, who decides when connection is given and when it is withdrawn. Over time, you may not even notice how much of your energy is spent responding, explaining, defending. That is how control operates, not through force, but through conditioning. When you choose silence, you interrupt that conditioning. You are no longer available for manipulation, no longer participating in the emotional rhythm she orchestrates. And the shift is immediate. The certainty she once felt that she could provoke, charm, guilt, or intimidate you into engagement begins to erode. What replaces it is unpredictability, and unpredictability is destabilizing to someone who depends on control. From a Jungian lens, as described by Carl Jung, control is often a compensation for inner chaos. When you remove yourself from the game, you expose that chaos. She may respond with escalation, attempts to regain dominance, or calculated indifference. But internally, the balance has shifted. Understand this. Power is not in domination. Power is in detachment. The moment you stop needing to win, you quietly reclaim authority over your own mind, and that is the strongest position you can occupy. There is a paradox here that many people fail to understand. When you stop chasing, explaining, or reacting, You do not always disappear from her mind. In many cases, you become more present. Silence creates psychological tension. It leaves unanswered questions. And the human mind, especially one accustomed to control, struggles deeply with unanswered questions. A narcissistic woman is used to being pursued emotionally or psychologically. She expects movement toward her, attempts to repair, to clarify, to regain connection. When that movement stops, the certainty she relied upon dissolves. Your silence becomes a puzzle she cannot immediately solve. And what cannot be solved often becomes an obsession. As Carl Jung suggested, what we cannot integrate consciously tends to circle in the unconscious. Your withdrawal disrupts her narrative. She may replay conversations, analyze your behavior, test strategies to provoke a response. Not always out of love, but out of wounded ego and the need to restore equilibrium. Understand this clearly. Attention feeds fixation, but absence amplifies mystery. When you refuse to participate in the emotional cycle, you force the other person to sit with uncertainty. And uncertainty, more than conflict, is what truly unsettles the ego. What makes silence so powerful is not simply that it removes you from the equation, it removes distraction. In many narcissistic dynamics, other people serve as mirrors, as sources of stimulation, as constant reassurance that the constructed identity is intact. When you step away, one of those mirrors disappears, and without that reflection, there is a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes profound, where she is left alone with herself. This is where the inner void becomes difficult to ignore. The persona, the charm, the superiority, all of it is designed to avoid confronting deeper insecurities. But silence slows everything down. There is no argument to win, no validation to absorb, no emotional reaction to manage. There is only stillness, and stillness can be confronting. As Carl Jung taught, when projections fail, the shadow begins to surface. The traits once blamed on others, insecurity, dependency, fear, no longer have an easy external target. In that space, discomfort arises, not because you attacked her, but because you stopped shielding her from herself. Remember this: when you withdraw from dysfunction, you force truth into the open. And truth, though unsettling, is the beginning of psychological awakening, for her and for you. When the armor begins to crack, what slips through is rarely what she shows the world. The anger, the pride, the sudden coldness, these are defenses. Beneath them are far more vulnerable emotions that the persona was built to conceal. Your silence does not create those feelings. It simply removes the noise that kept them hidden. At the core there is often fear. Fear of being insignificant. Fear of not being chosen. Fear of abandonment. A narcissistic structure survives on the belief that it is indispensable. When you withdraw calmly and without drama, you challenge that belief without ever speaking the accusation out loud. And that is what makes it powerful. It is not confrontation, it is revelation. As Carl Jung understood, the persona is a mask adapted for survival, but it is never the whole self. When the mask falters, the raw human beneath it briefly appears, anxious, uncertain, seeking stability. Whether she admits it or not, your silence forces her to feel what she has long avoided. But here is the deeper lesson. This is not about breaking someone else. It is about strengthening yourself. When you no longer react from fear, you stop feeding illusions, and you start living from inner authority.